With MLB Winter Meetings officially underway, all eyes are on the New York Mets and what David Stearns and this front office plan to do next. From Pete Alonso and Edwin Diaz to the rotation to the bullpen to potential surprise moves. This is a critical stretch for the direction of this Mets franchise. And joining me now to break it all down is one of the top insiders in the game. It's the New York Post baseball columnist, my guy, Jon Heyman, joins me now from Florida, where I was going to say the weather is really good, but Jon just told me the weather's not good. It is rainy there. Jon, how you doing, man?
I'm good. How are you, Dexter?
I'm doing okay. I'm doing okay. Hopefully the weather gets better for you there in Orlando, Florida. But Jon, let's start talking about the winter meetings because they're now underway. So let me ask you this. How active do you expect the Mets to be compared to other teams that are looking to contend for a World Series title in 2026?
Yeah, I expect the Mets to be among the most active team, if not the most active team. Obviously, Toronto's made some waves already. We know Philly's got a lot to do, but I mean, the Mets are a big market team with a big payroll, with great free agents, Díaz and Alonso. They've got to improve the rotation. They've got to fill out a bullpen that is, I won't say empty, but it's about half full right now. So there's a lot of work to do. They obviously have a deep-pocketed owner. They did not have a good year. Very disappointing season with 83 wins, missing the playoffs, being beaten out by Cincinnati. So they've got the wherewithal to do a lot, and they have the incentive to do a lot, and I expect them to do a lot.
All right. They do have the means to do a lot, and one of the things at the top of the list, you and I have talked about this before, bringing back Pete Alonso and Edwin Diaz, that's going to be the center of this Mets offseason. Of those two players, which do you believe a decision on either of those two players is more urgent for David Stearns? Would you rank Alonso over Diaz or Diaz over Alonso? Which one do you think is more urgent?
I mean, to me, they're both pretty urgent. You might say Alonso slightly more at this moment because they did bring in Devin Williams, who has been a very effective closer. At least in Milwaukee, he was a very effective closer. Was not that with the Yankees. Was pretty good in the setup role. To me, this doesn't give them tremendous cover, but right now they have no cover at first base. So I guess if I'm pressed at the moment, I guess we'll say they need Alonso back more, being the right-handed bat and big slugger, all-time home run hitter for the Mets. But I do believe they need Diaz back as well. He is the best closer out there. There's no real debate over that. Robert Suarez, very good, but few years older, doesn't really have the outpitch, quite the stuff that Diaz has. And, I would say both are imperative, but if I'm pressed today, I have to pick one, I'm going to say Alonso by a hair.
All right, so going with Alonso there. Let's keep it with Alonso real quick here, Jon, because how real is the market for Pete Alonso, and what kind of contract range do you believe that he'll ultimately command? Because there's a lot that's been floating out there since the offseason started. What's the market for Alonso?
Well, we know he struggled a bit last year and ended up coming back to the Mets, and that worked out obviously for both sides. He had a big year, much better year this year. Does not have the qualifying offer to weigh him down. I get that he's a year older, but I mean the difference in the years is enormous. He hit over 270 this year, right? That's a pretty good batting average in today's day and age. The Toronto Blue Jays were the top team at 265, so 270 pretty good. I think he was the best clutch hitter with the Mets as well. So I think he should have a very, very good market. The market's been kind of slow to develop, I think, for a lot of things. I do think that Boston is in on Alonso. They do have other alternatives and good ones, but to me, he really fits them as the right-handed slugger, which is exactly what they're looking for. Baltimore, another possibility. Right now, those look like the two best outside possibilities, but I'm sure that he will have other possibilities.
All right, we will see how that market shapes up for Pete Alonso. Now, when you go to Diaz, when you look at the history of big money closers, and some GMs may be reluctant to invest in them, how do you think the Mets are viewing Edwin Diaz's future, especially with someone who's going to want a long-term contract, Jon, and maybe that contract doesn't look as great on the back end of it? How do you think the Mets are viewing Diaz's future and what they might plan to offer him?
Yeah, I mean, that's the issue right now. It is the years. No surprise, that's the issue in most of these big deals. He has said, we know this, that he would like a 5-year deal. That's been out there publicly. We've even written that at the Post. They do not want to give a 5-year deal. The Mets are seemingly fairly adamant about that at this moment, not at the salary that he's been getting, around $20 million a year. right now, I do believe the Mets would be willing to do a 3-year deal, give him one extra year. That probably does not suffice for Edwin Diaz, and that's why we don't have a deal at this point, right? So he's going to be out there hitting the market, and certainly Toronto is a team that's got money. They're a team that is looking at the closer situation. There are other teams looking at closer. Detroit, although I'm not sure they're going to spend that kind of money. The Dodgers potentially. I'm not even sure the Dodgers are going to spend that kind of money. So I think Toronto is probably the main, I would say, competition for the Mets at the moment. But there certainly could be others because Diaz has been one of the best closers in baseball over the last several years. It's really Diaz and Robert Suarez, who I said a couple years older than Diaz, the two main guys out there. It wouldn't be a shock if one ends up with the Mets and one ends up with Toronto. We've got to think that the marriage with Diaz has been so good that the Mets should be able to figure this out, and Diaz too. I don't put us all on the team. They should be able to figure it out, and then Suarez would then end up potentially with Toronto. But there's certainly two big market possibilities for these two great closers. There are other closers on the market. They certainly could look at those as well. Certainly, Kenley Jansen, Brett Keller, good back end guys, but they're not in the category of Diaz or even Suarez.
I would agree with you on that. Let me just ask you this as a follow up, really quick, Jon. If the Mets can't come to a deal with Diaz and they go into next season with Devin Williams as a closer, do you view that as a failure in your eyes?
Well, that's certainly not good. I would not think that's not a success to move
Fair.
from Diaz, who I think is one of the best New York closers we've seen. Obviously, he's not Mariano Rivera, but he's one of the best closers in the game. Devin Williams was outstanding in Milwaukee. He was not very good with the Yankees overall, certainly not good in that closer role. So, to me, that I don't want to say failure, but that certainly would not be a success. And they would have to make up for it with many other things. They'd have to really bulk up that bullpen with other excellent pitchers. They'd have to bulk up the offense. Look, this is a team that won 83 games. This is a team that didn't make the playoffs when there were really only 5 really good teams in the league. There was room for them to make the playoffs. They could have gotten that 84th win. They were shut out by the Marlins. That is not, it's beyond disappointing. That's a disaster of a season for a team with a $340 million payroll. So they can't really be moving backwards in several areas, and certainly not at closer, not in my mind. If they bring in Suarez too, I mean, we can live with that. Suarez and Williams, maybe that works for them. Maybe that's the 100 million that they're not going to spend on Diaz. Potentially, but it still would be a disappointment if they don't bring back Diaz.
No, I think that's more than fair for sure. You and I talked about this the last time we got a chance to chat. We talked, and I'm going to be very careful about my term here. I'm not going to use the word ace, but do you believe the Mets are more likely, Jon, to trade for a front-end starter or sign one in free agency? Which of the two do you think is more likely for this team?
I'm going to say trade. At this point, they don't seem to be at the forefront in EMI. They're in on everything. So, to judge exactly how far in they are, it's a little difficult at this point. There have been reports out there about Framber Valdez. I'm not sure how invested they are in that one as well. So, I mean, those are the two aces that are out there, right? I would say Ranger Suarez is a very good pitcher. Free agent pitcher. Is he a number one? Probably not, but he's been outstanding in October. It certainly would be a good pickup for the Mets. I don't think they're leading that one either, so that's why I'm going at trade more likely. Obviously, there have been some big names that are kind of floated out there. Is Skubal getting traded? Now, that would be obviously an ace. Probably the best pitcher in baseball, certainly the best pitcher in the American League. A 1-year thing. So, to me, it's hard for me to see the Mets really mortgage their future for a 1-year pitcher, even somebody as good as Skubal. So I wouldn't say that one's particularly likely, but there are several trade candidates out there. They're familiar with Freddie Peralta. Certainly Stearns had him in Milwaukee. There is a decent chance, I think, that he will be dealt. Better chance for him to be dealt than Skubal, so that's a possibility. I think Gore from Washington will be dealt somewhere. I've heard that Cabrera's name is out there from the Marlins, and I understand these are division rivals, but I'm not ruling it out. I do think that there is a potential for a trade for a very good starting pitcher. I would say even more so than through free agency.
We have had a lot of Mets fans bring up to me, and you just mentioned him, Framber Valdez. You said you don't really think that's likely. Do you think it's realistic fit for the Mets at all? And do you have any concern when it comes to Valdez, which some people have brought up about his injury history? Is that part of the concern for you with maybe him being a good fit for the Mets?
No, I think Framber Valdez is got a reasonable history on durability. He's won as many games as anybody over this decade, so you have to be fairly durable to do that. He's second in quality starts to Zach Wheeler, former Met, unfortunately for the Mets. I think Framber Valdez is in the equation. It's a possibility, but I think the reports early on were a little bit premature, overblown on Valdez and the Mets. I do think, there are other teams that are going to be out there. Right now, I'm not sure that any of the big starters are going to be signing that quickly because, they're going to want to shoot at that $210 million that Dylan Cease got, and I'm not sure it's out there at this moment for Valdez, and we'll see on Imai. Imai is a little bit more of a wild card coming from Japan with big stuff, but it doesn't feel at this moment that the Mets are at the forefront of these free agent pitchers. I could be proven wrong. I know that there were reports out there earlier about Framber. My question on Framber would be the second half was not great. He had a 5 ERA in the second half, and he certainly logged a lot of innings. So the question would be going forward, is he going to be able to maintain the success that he's had? But he does have a terrific track record, and certainly would be a big plus if they did sign him overall.
All right, interesting stuff there on Framber Valdez. I want to talk to you about Kodai Senga, John, because his name has come up in trade talks, although he has stated that he wants to remain in Flushing. How serious is that discussion around the league about Senga and possibly moving him? And if the Mets do move Senga, what does that tell you about how they view their rotation, both short and long term?
Yeah, there definitely are talks going on about Senga, and they're definitely talking to teams, and I'm not going to be surprised if they trade him. The fact that he says that he'd like to stay, that's not going to weigh, I don't think, in any of this. It's a business. They're going to, if they feel like they have a good trade for Senga, they will trade him. I do think there probably is a market for him, although last year he was great at the beginning of the year, and then after he came back following the injury, he was poor. I mean, they sent him to the minors and never called him back. So, it's a little bit of a tricky situation to trade for him. He was an ace his first year with the Mets. Second year he was injured, and then last year he was up and down. Literally, he was up at the beginning and clearly way down at the end. So it's going to be difficult to find the right value on him. That's really the issue, not what he wants to do, because that doesn't really weigh into it in terms of a trade.
Yeah.
Unless someone's got a no trade, then it weighs in.
Right.
Yeah.
Big question is, what is the value for Kodai Senga? A couple more for you, John. I want to ask you about center field. How big of a priority is center field for the Mets this offseason, and what do you make of their internal center field options versus going out and actually acquiring an established defender there in center field that can also hit a little bit?
Well, they obviously do need a center fielder, so I would say that is a priority. Is it number one? Maybe not. And the reason I don't think it's the number one priority is because they really love this Carson Bench, who had a terrific year in the minor leagues for them, and they really have high hopes for him, perhaps even for this coming season. And I think they've been out there saying that they'd like to give this guy a chance to win the center field job. So that being said, I think we're looking at priorities being starting pitcher, relief pitcher, first base, and left field over center field. You've got so many other priorities and really requirements to get done. It does feel like center field would be on, I don't say the back burner, but if it's a priority number 5, they better get this other stuff done, which includes obviously the bullpen and first, and we talked about Díaz and Alonso. And if you don't get Díaz or Alonso, you've got to improve the bullpen and first base. You need a first baseman, right? It wouldn't look too good if you don't have a first baseman, and I'm just not sure how they replace Alonso. So to me, center field is probably number 5 on the hit list. So is that a priority? You could call it that, but I think they feel pretty good about Carson Bench, the kid that they got out of Oklahoma.
Yeah, they've been very high on him. You just talked about the bullpen there, John. Do you think it's possible the Mets could rebuild their bullpen this winter and try to build like a super bullpen with multiple high-end relievers, or do you think David Stearns is going to go bargain basement shopping with the relievers? How do you see them going? How do you see them going about that?
Well, I don't think they've given up on Diaz. And if you have Diaz and Williams, that's a pretty super bullpen. I mean, it's not Diaz, Suarez, and Williams, but
Right.
Diaz and Williams is a pretty good start. So I'm not giving up on Diaz, and I'd still call that a pretty super bullpen if they bring Diaz back. If they don't bring Diaz back, and they sign Suarez, I mean, it's still a pretty solid backhand there, but it's certainly a disappointment not bringing Diaz back because Diaz is beloved by the fans and, frankly, better all around than Suarez. Suarez doesn't really have that out pitch. He does throw strikes. He does throw hard. We saw that in the playoffs against the Mets a couple years ago. Very, very good pitcher, but he isn't quite Diaz. So, let's get a bullpen put together before we really start talking about super bullpen, though, because right now you've got one right-hander in that bullpen, and that's Devin Williams. Potentially, I guess Brazoban could be another guy that they're looking at. But it's a pretty thin bullpen at the moment. So we got to build up to average first, and then we go to super.
That's fair. The bullpen is bare. Got to build it up before you can even get to super. More than fair, though. Couple more for you. If you had to predict one, I would say, surprise move, John, what type of move do you think the Mets could make that might surprise the fan base?
Well, this has been out there a little bit, so I don't know how much of a surprise it is. But if they don't sign Alonso, could Schwarber be a possibility? I know they've checked in. I wouldn't say it's a likelihood. Does he really leave Philly to go to the rival Mets? Does he eschew the hometown Cincinnati Reds to go to the Mets? I mean, I'm not going to rule it out. That's why it'd be a surprise, right? But it's certainly a consideration. If you don't have Alonso, Schwarber could potentially be the guy. But to me, Alonso makes more sense because you need to fill first base, right? So even if they don't see Alonso as a full-time first baseman at this moment, more of a everyday player, obviously, one of the better sluggers in the game, everyday player who's a DH a lot of the time, he's still going to be playing some first base, whereas Schwarber, he's played a little first base, not that much. It seems like to me the fit is better with Alonso, but that's why you said it's surprise. So I'm going to say Schwarber as a potential surprise move. I think Philly's more likely. I think probably the Red Sox are more likely. Other teams have checked in as well. Could the Cubs do it? Maybe. It's probably a surprise if he goes anywhere but Philly, including the Mets.
That would be a surprise. He'd be getting some power in there, but still would have to worry about first base. Right about that. Last thing for me here, John. All right, let's put it like this. When the Mets leave the winter meetings, what would success actually look like for this front office when they leave the winter meetings? What's a successful winter meetings? Now, we know how baseball free agency can go. Things can be very, very drawn out. But if you had to say, hey, this is successful winter meetings for the Mets when they leave this week, what does that look like?
Okay, I'm going to give them more time than the winter. I know we're starting the winter meetings, and last year they signed Soto, and a lot of great stuff happened at the winter meetings, not just with the Mets, but with many teams. It doesn't feel like there's going to be I mean, we'll see. We don't. It's hard to predict how much action there's going to be, but 90% of the free agents are still available, and we have a lot of time to go. It's not basketball where there's a deadline and everything gets done right away. Now, there is a little bit more interest at this moment, and there's more contact, and it's face to face. It's not just texting. So I do expect a fair amount to happen here at the winter meetings, but I'm hesitant to give them a grade and say, well, they got to do this and that and the other thing within the next 5 days. I think that's a little tough. Certainly, by the end of this winter, though, you got to have a good first baseman, preferably Alonso. You got to have a better back end of the bullpen, preferably Diaz. They need to get an outfielder. Could that be Bellinger? Maybe. I do feel like the Mets are going to do a lot. I think they're going to really improve this team. I don't feel like they can come back with the same team. I think they feel the same. And I do believe they're going to have a big winter, and it's going to be an exciting winter, but I'm not going to hold them to doing it in the next 4 to 5 days. That's a little tough, even for me.
It's tough. It is tough. Let me ask you this, Reds Insider, one last thing. Do you wish there was more activity at the winter meetings? Do you wish it was a little bit more like basketball and there was sort of a deadline?
It would make all of our lives easier.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah. Not just mine. It would make their lives a lot easier, right?
Yeah.
If it all gets done and then they can rest. But when Alonzo, when did he sign? Bryce Harper signed on February 28th, memorably with the Phillies. There have been a lot of big stars who've signed into spring training. And that's a long time from now. We're just at the beginning of December at this point. So that's the way it goes in baseball. I'm sure a lot of executives would like to do it with a deadline and just have a lot of frenzied activity. We do have a deadline in the summer at the trade deadline,
Yep.
and it certainly creates a lot of excitement at that moment. But this way, I guess there's anticipation and excitement throughout the offseason. Last year, I think was that was helpful when we got Soto got signed and Crochet was traded, Fried was signed. A lot got done, and Snell had already been done by that point, I believe, last year, right?
Yep.
And so there wasn't. I think there's going to be a lot to do after this one. I don't know the reason. Is it because there's a concern about the collective bargaining agreement? Is it a concern over the fact that Dylan Cease, a guy with a 4.56 ERA, got 210 million, and nobody wants to repeat that? I mean, if someone with a 4.5 ERA is worth 210 million, what does everybody else get? We're talking about Framber. I mean, he's got quite a good track record. Is he worth more than 210 million? I think it's going to take a while for everybody to figure it out, for them to come together, to compromise. So I do think there will be activity. There's going to be trades. There's going to be free agent signings. We're not going to see something like Soto, impossibly, of course, because we don't have Soto on the board. But, I think we'll see some good stuff happen here, but things will go on for months. Unfortunately, for me, but for them more, because it's a lot of work.
Yeah, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of waiting for you. But, Jon Heyman's always on top of it, the great baseball insider and columnist for us here at the New York Post. Jon, I appreciate you taking some time to help us get started with these winter meetings around the New York Mets here on Straight Outta Flushing. And I will talk to you soon, my friend. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Dexter. See you later.